The heat of the Manchurian summer was a suffocating blanket. In the field hospital outside Sinking, the air hung thick and still, heavy with the scent of antiseptic, blood, and the dust of the plains. Nurse Hana Tanaka, her white uniform clinging to her skin, moved with a practiced economy of motion, her face a mask of serene focus. The paper walls of the ward did little to muffle the groans of the men, soldiers of the once mighty Kwantung Army, now collections of splintered bone and infected wounds. Her attention was on Corporal Kenji Sato, a boy of 19 with ancient eyes. A shrapnel wound in his leg festered, the fever stealing what little strength he had left. "You must eat, Sato-san," she urged softly, holding a small bowl of thin rice gruel. He turned his head away, his lips cracked. "There is no honor in this, Tanaka-san," he rasped. "To die slowly, in a bed. We were meant to be a shield for the homeland, a shield that shatters." He was echoing the rhetoric they had all been fed, the code of Gyokusai, the honorable death, like a shattered jewel. But here, death was not a brilliant explosion. It was a slow, putrid decay. Hana placed the bowl down. "Your duty now is to live," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "That is an order from your emperor. A strong Japan needs its sons." It was a lie, or at least a hope she clung to. The news from the homeland was sparse, filtered through the army's censors, but whispers of a new type of bomb and the obliteration of a city called Hiroshima had slithered through the ranks like a phantom. The war was far away, yet it felt closer than ever. From the diary of Hana Tanaka, August 8, 1945. The sky has been clear for a week. The sorghum fields are golden. It is a peaceful sight, a terrible lie. The men from the 107th Division arrived today. They are not the proud soldiers I saw leave for the border. They are ghosts. They speak of entire Soviet divisions appearing from nowhere, of tanks that move faster than cavalry. Our commanders assure us the border is impenetrable, that the Kwantung Army is the emperor's finest. But the fear in the eyes of the wounded tells a different story. Kenji-san's fever is worse. I pray to the spirits of my ancestors for his strength and for the strength of Japan. The evening of August 4th was unnervingly quiet. The usual rumble of supply trucks was absent. General Otozo Yamada, commanding the Kwantung Army from his headquarters in Sinking, had assured his staff that any Soviet action was unlikely before October. He was relying on the spring muds of the next year to be his greatest ally, not anticipating the sheer audacity of Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky's plan. A multi-pronged blitzkrieg across 1,000 miles of unforgiving terrain. The illusion of peace was shattered just after midnight. It began not with a single shot, but with a deep, guttural roar that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. Hana was jolted from a light sleep in the nurses' quarters. The ground trembled. The roar was joined by a high-pitched scream that tore through the night. A series of deafening cracks, one after another, lit up the horizon in strobing flashes of orange and white. "Artillery!" someone screamed. Chaos erupted. Nurses scrambled for their posts. The wounded cried out in terror. Hana ran to the main ward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The paper walls vibrated violently. Through a tear in one, she saw it. The night sky streaked with the fiery tails of Katyusha rockets, what the Germans had called Stalin's organs. They fell like a steel rain upon the Japanese defensive positions miles away. The distant symphony of destruction grew closer with terrifying speed. Soon, the rhythmic clatter of tank treads and the pop, pop, pop of small arms fire replaced the thunder of artillery. The hospital's small contingent of guards mounted a futile defense, their Arisaka rifle shots like pebbles against an iron tidal wave. A T-34 tank, its red star a malevolent eye in the dawn's early light, simply crushed the front gate. It rolled past the ward, its engine a deafening snarl, followed by waves of infantry. They were huge men, their faces grim under their helmets, carrying submachine guns that seemed to spit fire without pause. The ward door burst open, kicked in by a heavy boot. A Soviet soldier stood silhouetted against the burning world outside. He was young, his face smeared with grime, his eyes wide. He scanned the room, the rows of helpless men, the terrified nurses. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, there was only the sound of ragged breathing and the crackle of flames. The war had not just arrived, it had consumed them whole. The young Soviet soldier, his face barely clear of boyhood fuzz, held the submachine gun with a steadiness that belied his age. He shouted something in his harsh, guttural language, a phrase that needed no translation. His eyes, wide and alert, flickered over the rows of wounded Japanese soldiers, then to the small group of nurses huddled near the back wall. He was Private Dmitry Volkov, and he was the face of their new reality. Another soldier joined him, then another, their heavy boots scuffing on the wooden floorboards. The patients who could move tried to sit up, their faces a mixture of defiance and terror. Corporal Sato, his fever-bright eyes fixed on the red star on Dmitri's ushanka, struggled to push himself up on his elbows. "Tenno Heika Banzai," he whispered, the Emperor's name a final prayer on his lips. Before the cry could gain strength, a new figure filled the doorway. He was an officer, older than the others, his uniform crisp despite the battle. His face was sharp, intelligent, and devoid of any emotion. This was Major Ivan Morozov of the Fifth Army. He surveyed the scene with a practiced assessing gaze, his eyes lingering for a moment on the nurses. He spoke, not in Russian, but in clipped, heavily accented Japanese. "This hospital is now under the control of the Red Army. All Japanese military and medical personnel are prisoners of war. You will follow all orders without question." Hana stepped forward, her training overriding her fear. "Major," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "these men are gravely wounded. They require constant care. They cannot be moved." Major Morozov's gaze fell upon her. It was cold, impersonal, like a scientist observing a specimen. "Your duties as nurses of the Imperial Army are concluded," he stated flatly. "The Soviet people have not forgotten the undeclared war at Khalkhin Gol. Your wounded will be tended to by our doctors. You," he motioned to Hana and the other nurses, "will be segregated, outside, now." There was no room for argument. The command was absolute. Soldiers gestured emphatically with their rifles. Numbly, Hana and the other women were herded out of the ward, away from the men they had sworn to protect. The last thing Hana saw was Corporal Sato's arm falling limp as a Soviet medic, a woman in uniform, approached his bedside. The sight was a profound shock. An enemy woman taking her place. Outside, the pre-dawn air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite and diesel exhaust. The hospital grounds were a scene of methodical conquest. T-34 tanks sat like iron beasts amidst the crushed flower beds. Columns of Soviet soldiers moved with disciplined purpose, securing the perimeter, while a separate group disarmed the few remaining hospital guards, forcing them to their knees in the dirt. The rising sun glinted off the bayonets, the red stars, the foreign faces. It was the sun of a new and terrible day. Witness testimony of a Japanese nurse, post-war archives. They were like a flood. We had been told for years that one Japanese soldier was worth 10 of the enemy, that our spirit, our Yamato Damashi, was invincible. But spirit does not stop tanks. They did not shout or loot like the bandits in the stories. They were quiet, efficient. They separated us immediately, the men, the walking wounded, the nurses. I remember looking at my hands. They were trembling. An hour before, they had been changing a dressing, saving a life. Now, they were the useless hands of a prisoner. We had no name, no rank. We were just the captured. Hana and a dozen other nurses were made to stand in a line by a brick wall, their white uniforms a stark contrast to the grime of war surrounding them. Private Dmitry Volkov and another soldier were assigned to guard them. He did not look at them, keeping his eyes fixed on the perimeter, his rifle held across his chest. He was a boy, Hana realized, perhaps the same age as Kenji Sato, a farm boy from some distant cold land, sent here to turn her world upside down. Major Morozov approached, a list in his hand. He walked down the line, his gaze passing over each woman. He was not looking at them as people, but as assets, as numbers on a ledger. "You will be transported to a holding camp pending processing," he announced, his Japanese still cold and precise. "You will be given food and water. You will work. Any attempt to escape will be met with maximum force." He paused, his eyes settling on Hana once more. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw a flicker of something other than cold duty in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Your Japan has lost the war," he said, the words dropping like stones into the silence. "Your emperor is a phantom. Your generals have failed you. Your new life begins today." He turned and walked away. The order was given in Russian, and the nurses were prodded into a ragged column. As they were marched away from the ruins of their hospital, past the endless lines of Soviet trucks and armor that stretched to the horizon, Hannah felt a profound sense of dislocation. They were leaving everything behind: their patients, their duty, their identity. They were walking into a future as blank and terrifying as the vast, empty plains of Manchuria that now surrounded them. The journey was a bone-jarring ordeal in the back of a canvas-covered Studebaker truck, a piece of American Lend-Lease equipment now serving the Red Army. Hannah and the other nurses were crammed together, bouncing on the hard wooden benches as the truck churned through rutted dirt roads. Through tears in the canvas, Hannah caught glimpses of a world turned on its head. Long columns of Japanese soldiers, their rifles gone, their shoulders slumped in defeat, were marched east by guards on horseback. The sky, once the domain of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service, was now a featureless blue expanse, empty save for the occasional drone of a Soviet Yak-9 fighter. The scale of the invasion was terrifyingly apparent. It wasn't a battle, it was an avalanche. After hours that felt like days, the truck shuddered to a halt. The canvas flap was thrown back, and the harsh command to dismount was barked in Russian. They had arrived. Their prison was not a camp of tents and mud, but a stark three-story concrete building that loomed against the gray afternoon sky. It was a former Japanese colonial administration office, a symbol of imperial power, now scarred with bullet holes and draped with a large red banner bearing the hammer and sickle. The red sun emblem above the main entrance had been clumsily painted over, with a dripping red star. They were herded into a large, cold atrium. The air smelled of damp concrete, stale tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Soviet soldiers moved about with a casual sense of ownership, their chatter echoing in the vast space. A clerk at a makeshift desk methodically confiscated their few remaining personal items: a small photo, a good luck charm, a fountain pen. Each item taken felt like another piece of their identity being stripped away. Hannah watched as the small, worn omamori charm her mother had given her for protection was tossed unceremoniously into a wooden crate. Major Ivan Morozov stood waiting for them in the center of the hall, his boots polished to a mirror sheen. He held no list this time. His hands were clasped behind his back. "Welcome to your new quarters," he began, his voice echoing slightly. He did not raise it, yet it cut through the murmurs and commanded absolute attention. "As you have seen, the advance of the Red Army has been swift. We have liberated this territory far ahead of schedule. This creates logistical challenges." He paced slowly before them, a predator circling its prey. "Housing is one such challenge. The main barracks are filled with your former soldiers. There is no other secure facility large enough to hold you." He stopped and faced them directly. A cold dread, colder than the concrete floor, began to creep up Hannah's spine. The other women were stock still, their faces pale masks of apprehension. "Therefore," Major Morozov continued, his voice as flat and hard as stone, "a practical solution has been decided upon. You will be billeted in the auxiliary wings on the second floor. These wings are also currently occupied by soldiers of the Trans-Baikal Front." A collective silent gasp seemed to suck the air from the room. The women exchanged terrified, disbelieving glances. Morozov's eyes swept over them, daring any of them to speak. "There are not enough rooms for segregation. You are all now workers for the Soviet state. The old distinctions are meaningless. You will be assigned to rooms. You will share the facilities. You will follow the orders of the soldiers quartered with you. That is all." From the diary of Hana Tanaka, reconstructed from memory, he said it so simply, as if he were announcing mealtimes. "You will share the facilities." But in his eyes, in the sudden stillness of the room, we all understood the true command. We were no longer nurses, no longer women, no longer Japanese. We were spoils of war, property to be allocated. The room was full of Soviet soldiers, and for the first time, I looked at their faces. Some were smirking, but the young one, the boy from the hospital, Dmitri, he would not look at us. He stared at the floor, his knuckles white where he gripped his rifle. In his shame, I saw the true shape of our horror. We were to be led upstairs, into the lion's den, and the unimaginable command hung in the air, unspoken but absolute. "You will share this bed with us." The major turned on his heel and strode away, his duty done. The guards, led by a burly sergeant, moved forward. "Davai, let's go!" he bellowed. The women flinched, huddling closer together, a flock of doves facing a pack of wolves. There was nowhere to run. A soldier grabbed one of the younger nurses by the arm. She cried out, a thin, sharp sound of pure terror. Hannah felt her blood run cold. The professional mask she had worn for so long was cracking. This was not a problem that could be solved with medical training or a calm demeanor. It was a violation of the deepest order of her world. As the guards began to push them toward the grand staircase, toward the shadowy upper floors from which the low laughter of men could now be heard, a single, terrifying thought consumed her. Survival might cost more than her life. The grand staircase felt like a gallows climb. Each marble step, once trodden by the polished boots of imperial administrators, was now scuffed with the mud of the Trans-Baikal front. With every landing, the sounds from above grew louder, the raucous laughter of men, the melancholic strum of a balalaika, and the sharp clink of vodka bottles. The air grew thick with the smells of stale sweat, cheap Makorka tobacco, and spilled spirits, the scent of an army at rest after a swift and brutal victory. The sergeant pushed them onto the second-floor landing. A long corridor stretched before them, lined with imposing wooden doors. Most were ajar, spilling yellow light and noise into the hallway. Soldiers lounged in the doorways, their tunics unbuttoned, their gazes hungry and curious as they watched the procession of pale-faced women. They were being paraded like livestock at a market. The sergeant stopped before a room, shoved the first two nurses inside, and slammed the door shut. A woman's sharp cry was cut off by the heavy thud of the wood. He moved to the next door, and the next. It was a brutal, systematic distribution. Hannah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt a primal urge to scream, to run, but her feet were rooted to the floor, encased in lead. Finally, it was her turn. She and another nurse, a terrified young woman named Emmy, were pushed into a room at the end of the hall. The door was left open. The room contained 4 simple metal frame cots. 2 Soviet soldiers were already there. One, a barrel-chested corporal with a heavy black mustache, was sitting on a bed, a half-empty bottle of vodka dangling from his hand. He grinned, a gold tooth flashing in the dim light. The other was Private Dmitry Volkov. He was in the far corner, meticulously cleaning the bolt of his Mosin Nagant rifle, his back mostly to the room, trying to make himself invisible. The corporal lurched to his feet, his eyes fixing on Hannah and Emmy. He took a swig of vodka and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his grin widening. He gestured with the bottle toward the 2 empty cots. He spoke in slurred Russian, but his meaning was brutally clear. The unspoken command was now given voice, thick with alcohol and conquest. Emmy let out a small sob and shrank behind Hannah. The corporal took a staggering step forward, his eyes locked on Hannah. This was it, the moment of no return. Hannah braced herself, her mind a white-hot blank of terror. "Ostav yeyo!" Leave her be. The voice was quiet but firm. It came from the corner. Private Dmitry Volkov had risen to his feet. He hadn't turned around fully, but he had stopped cleaning his rifle. The corporal grunted, annoyed. "What did you say, boy? These are our quarters now. The major said so himself." He gestured again at the women. "They are part of the furnishings." Dmitry finally turned. His young face was grim, his eyes holding a surprising steel. "The major said they are workers," he said in clear Russian, his voice steady. "They are no good for work if you break them, Corporal." He tapped the stock of his rifle on the floor, a single sharp sound that cut through the alcoholic haze. "Tomorrow we clear the rail yard. We need every hand. This is an order from command." Post-war testimony of Major Ivan Morozov, interrogation transcript. Discipline is the foundation of any army. Victory creates idleness. Idleness is the enemy of discipline. The Japanese nurses, they were a logistical necessity. We needed laborers, cooks, cleaners, medics. Their status as women was irrelevant to the strategic situation. Any actions taken by my men that undermined their ability to contribute to the war effort were a breach of discipline. The Soviet soldier is a liberator, not a barbarian. That was the official line. Of course, what happens in a barracks at the edge of the world? Reality is more complex. You control what you can. The corporal stared at Dmitry, a flicker of drunken anger in his eyes. He was bigger, older, and of a higher rank. But Dmitri's argument was one of cold military logic, and behind his logic stood the specter of Major Morozov and the NKVD officers who enforced discipline with brutal efficiency. The corporal hesitated, then spat on the floor. "Fine," he grumbled, taking another long pull from the bottle. "Keep them, but they sleep on the floor." He gestured to the far corner, near a stack of dusty crates, then collapsed back onto his cot and turned his face to the wall. The immediate danger had passed, but the air remained thick with menace. Dmitri did not look at Hana. He picked up 2 folded blankets from his own cot and tossed them into the corner the corporal had indicated. Then he returned to his own space, sitting on the edge of his bed, his rifle resting across his lap. He had drawn an invisible line in the dust of the room. He had not offered comfort or kindness, only a brutally pragmatic reprieve. Hana slowly guided the trembling Emmy to the corner. It was a small space, shadowed and cold, but it was theirs. As she sank to the floor, pulling the rough wool blanket around her shoulders, she could still hear the noises from the corridor, a door slamming, a burst of harsh laughter, followed by a faint, desperate weeping. Her own safety was a fragile, temporary thing, dependent on the whim of a boy soldier from the enemy side. The night was still young, and in the house of concrete and whispers, survival was measured one breath at a time. The days that followed blurred into a grueling routine of exhaustion and fear. At dawn, the nurses were roused and marched under guard to the sprawling, sinking rail yard. Their soft hands, accustomed to the delicate work of dressing wounds, were now raw and calloused from hauling debris, sorting scrap metal, and loading heavy crates of ammunition onto flat cars bound for the west. They worked alongside captured Kwantung Army soldiers, men who now refused to meet their eyes, their shared shame a palpable silence between them. The nights offered little respite. Hana and Emmy existed in their small corner of the room, a tiny island in a sea of latent threat. The boorish corporal ignored them, his attention consumed by vodka and card games. Private Dmitri Volkov remained a silent, watchful presence. He never spoke to them, never acknowledged them directly, but his disciplined presence in the room acted as an unspoken deterrent. He would sit on his cot, maintaining his rifle or reading letters from home, a stoic guardian by default, not by choice. The invisible line he had drawn on that first night held firm. It was a fragile peace, and Hana knew that a single transfer order, a single drunken whim, could shatter it instantly. On the afternoon of August 15th, the work was abruptly halted. An order was shouted across the rail yard, and all prisoners, soldiers and nurses alike, were herded into the main square of the compound. They stood in dusty, exhausted ranks under the oppressive afternoon sun. Major Ivan Morozov appeared on the steps of the administration building. He stood alone, his posture rigid. The usual smirks and chatter of the guards had vanished. They stood at attention, their faces unreadable. "Prisoners of the former Kwantung Army," Morozov began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent square. He did not use his Japanese today, letting a translator standing beside him convert his words into a stark, emotionless drone. "At noon today, your emperor addressed his people by radio. He has accepted the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. He has announced the unconditional surrender of all Japanese armed forces." A profound, unnatural silence fell over the assembled prisoners. It was not the silence of discipline, but of shock so deep it stole the breath. A low murmur rippled through the ranks, a sound of disbelief. Surrender? Unconditional? The words were alien, impossible. Their entire world, their entire spiritual universe, was built on the foundation that Japan could not be defeated. Morozov let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "The Second World War is over. Your struggle is finished." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned faces. "Your status, however, has not changed. You remain prisoners of the Soviet Union. You will continue to work to repay the damages inflicted upon the Soviet people. Await further orders." He turned sharply and disappeared back inside the building. The spell was broken. A high-ranking Japanese officer, a man who had always carried himself with fierce pride, suddenly crumpled to his knees, his face in his hands, his body racked with silent sobs. The sight was more shocking than any explosion. The shield had not just shattered, it had turned to dust. From the diary of Hana Tanaka, reconstructed from memory, August 15th, 1945. The war is over. They told us the Emperor himself spoke the words. I did not feel relief. I did not feel joy. I felt nothing. A great hollow emptiness. Everything we sacrificed for, every boy I watched die believing in victory, it was all for this. To become laborers for a foreign power in a land that is no longer ours. We looked at each other, the other nurses, the soldiers. We were ghosts, the remnants of a fallen empire. We had been told we were the children of a goddess, destined to rule. Now, we are just prisoners. Our war had ended, but our struggle had just begun. That night, the atmosphere in the room was different. The corporal was gone, transferred to another unit. Only Dmitri remained. The building was quiet, the usual drunken revelry replaced by a subdued, watchful calm. The victors were absorbing their victory. Hannah lay on her blanket in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling, the major's words echoing in her mind. You will continue to work. The future was a vast gray expanse. Siberia, the guards whispered. Years of labor in the cold. She heard a slight rustle. In the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy window, she saw Dmitri standing by the door, his pack on his back, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He was leaving. He looked toward her corner for a single, fleeting moment. Their eyes did not meet. He hesitated, then placed something on the edge of her blanket before slipping silently out of the room and closing the door behind him. Hannah waited until the sound of his boots faded down the corridor. She reached out a trembling hand. It was a small, dense loaf of dark rye bread. It was heavy and real. It was not a gesture of pity or of friendship. It was sustenance, a simple, practical recognition of the long, hard road that lay ahead. Clasping the rough bread to her chest, Hannah Tanaka closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in a grim acceptance of the cold dawn that was yet to come.